welcome. Christine E. Schulze here, aka the Elvish author, hopefully soon to be your favorite Elvish author, and today I'm going to be introducing you to all of my young adult fantasy books. In my intro video, I do introduce you all to my series and kind of explain a little bit about what each series is about. But in this video, we're going to be going a little bit more in depth with my individual books. So let's just hop right into it. Strap on your elf ears and get ready to listen and learn about all of my young adult fantasy books. Some of the books that I will be introducing you to today include Prelude of Fire, the Stragoni Sequence, Larmar Gem of the Sea, the Chronicles of the Mira, the Crystal Rings, Maiden, Lily in the Snow, One Starry Night, and the Pirates of Amelian. Okay, so in my intro video, I do talk to you about my different series, and so how we're going to do this is I am going to talk about each of my individual young adult books that I have out right now, but we'll divide it into series to make it a little bit easier and to let you guys know which books are in which series. So the first book that we're going to talk about is from the series called The Laszolian Quartet, and that would be my book, Prelude of Fire. The Laszolian Quartet is going to be a 4-book series, hence the name Quartet, in which a lot of the magic is musically based. So people are going to sing or play a musical instrument to cast a spell. And a big overarching theme of this series is also the choices that we make and how those choices affect everyone and everything around us. So in book 2, which will be out sometime later this year, it is a prequel and it's a backstory to one of the main characters in here, but it's also a backstory to one of the villains. And so it's interesting to kind of see how both of those characters make different choices that just help them to become completely different people and go in completely different directions. And there was definitely a point at which the character who becomes a villain could have made completely different choices and just doesn't. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and read the blurb to this book to give you guys a better idea, and we'll probably do that for all of the books just to give you guys a little bit more information on what each book is about. The blurb to Prelude of Fire says, Ashley is a fire who can harness powers of flame from the sun. Despite her powers, or perhaps because of them, she has always felt like an outsider among the forest-footer elves who raised her and her brother, Merit. When their home is attacked by King Ragnar and his seer, a vicious drought that burns all in its path, Ashley embarks on a quest to save it. Her only clues are the strange music playing inside her head, the warnings of a captive princess, and a broken prism left to her by her long-lost mother. With the help of new friends, including a snarky elf, 2 squabbling but kind-spirited bards, and a boy who can turn into a tree, Ashley journeys to collect the remaining prism shards. Can she find them and defeat Ragnar before his seer consumes all Hyloria? Or will the secrets of the prism cause Ashley to lose her new friends, her family, and even herself? Prelude of Fire is the first in an epic quartet that combines music and magic while reminding us that our choices, not our circumstances, define who we truly are and will become. So again, that is book 1. Book 1 is really good for folks who, like me, love The Legend of Zelda, or who like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, particularly the later Harry Potter books where you have a little bit more of a quest involved. It's a very quest-heavy book. The characters end up going on this quest to collect these prism shards that can help stop the seer, which is the vicious drought and fire that King Ragnar has created that is sweeping across the land. And you also meet a variety of characters as you go along. One thing that's always been important to me is including more diverse characters within fantasy fiction. Even as a small kid, I just happened to observe that there wasn't as much diversity, and with that being my favorite genre, I decided to just take matters into my own hands. They always say that if what you love to read doesn't exist, that you should just write it yourself. And so that's what I've been doing basically since I was a kid. So there's a lot of racial diversity in here, All of the races are made up. I don't really feel like it would be right for me to, you know, write from the perspective of another ethnicity or culture, me not being from that ethnicity or culture. Obviously, I could do the research, but I've always just really loved creative license in everything. I don't like having to adhere to rules in anything. That's why I love fantasy so much, because I can just kind of do my own thing. And so all of the races in here are, in all my worlds, are made up, but you'll have a diverse look to the races. You'll have, you know, they have their own cultures and their own customs. And again, that's because it's always been important to me that I feel like everyone should be able to see themselves represented in their favorite genre. And if your favorite genre happens to be fantasy, then you want to see characters who are people of color. Or another thing, in my day job, I work with folks who have autism and other disabilities, and so I've started to include a couple more characters in my books who also have disabilities, because they should get to go on fantasy adventures the same as anybody else. A lot of my kids' books, which we'll do a separate video on, are also heavily inspired by people in my life that I've known who have disabilities, and a lot of the characters have been inspired and created from those people in my life. So yeah, if you love going on a quest, if you love a lot of magic and collecting, you know, a variety of party members and going on a quest to save the land, then this is a very good book for you. There are some twists along the way, you know, and I do also kind of like to compare this series a little bit to Game of Thrones, a much cleaner Game of Thrones, definitely for young adults. So obviously there is some violence, we're in a war here, but not to the degree of Game of Thrones. Also, without having all of the sex and on-screen intimacy that Game of Thrones would have, but in the sense that as you get into the later books, you do start to have a little bit of that political palace intrigue as well. This book could also be a standalone. It's very much its own story, but as you get later into the series, you start to learn more background on certain characters, and just, like I said, they kind of turn into, there's still some quests and adventures to go on, but there's also, especially in book 2, some political palace intrigue going on as well. So yeah, so that's Prelude of Fire, and that's a little bit about the Laszolian Quartet series. Next, we're going to talk about the Amelian Legends. So, the Amelian Legends is a collection of standalone young adult fantasy stories. Some of them are more like short novellas, some of them are novel length, and a couple of them are even anthologies. And they're all set within the same fantastic universe, but they can each be read completely separate. The more that you read, and even like if you read the Amelian Legends and then you go on to read something like the Laszolian Quartet, you'll notice little crossovers in my different books and series. Like you might notice like, oh, like we saw that character in the other story, or oh, I remember going to that place in the other story, or I remember hearing about their history or whatever. But the Amelian Legends, even though you might notice there's cool little crossovers, they're still completely separate stories with separate characters that can be read in literally any order. A lot of them take place in the world of, well, in our world, I've created kind of like this alternate mythological history for North America. You can see on the map here, you've got North America over here, and there's all these magical kingdoms, and then there's a bunch of magical islands that I made up as well off of the western coast of North America. And I do have some backstory as to how these kingdoms would have existed, and then, you know, at some point had to go into hiding once the European settlers came into the mix. But now in modern times, the magical peoples and the non-magical peoples are able to live in harmony with one another per the American government and the Laszolian Council making these peaceful agreements with each other. So speaking of the Laszolian Council, or Laz in particular, a lot of the stories take place in this realm here, which is known as the Laszolian Realm. It's comprised of a lot of those islands, and so a lot of the stories in the Amelian Legends do take place in that realm. However, there are a couple that take place in a completely separate world. In my universe, there are different worlds that can be reached via portals, magical portals, and magical gates and things of that nature. So we're just going to go through one at a time and teach you a little bit about each book, and so that way you can figure out for yourself which ones you'd be interested in reading first. So first up, we have Larmar Gem of the Sea. As you can see, this is quite a small book. It's more of like a really short novella. But the reason that I've decided to make it into a paperback along with all the others is because I personally prefer a paperback over ebook. So I like to have that option available to people as much as possible. So yeah, let's go ahead and read the blurb to give you an idea of what it's about. The blurb says, a fearless captain and a mysterious girl who walks on water, an underwater city, and a destined deadly curse. What could possibly go wrong? Captain Jorah is notorious for being one of the youngest explorers to ever sail the Furian waters. He's also notorious for landing his crew in situations they hadn't counted on. Situations involving man-eating mermaids and other dangerous misadventures. When Jorah decides to search for the legendary underwater city of Larmar, he doesn't account for the quest that follows. Rescued from shipwreck by a mysterious young lady who walks on water and carries a singing seashell around her neck, he soon finds himself reunited with an old friend once thought lost to him. Before he knows it, he's caught up in a race against time to save her yet again, this time from a looming prophecy about a deadly serpent destined to consume her entire race. Can Jorah help the girl save her people before the dark prophecy can complete itself? Well, to find out, you'll have to read the story for yourself. So the story of Jorah and Larmar, as you can tell from reading this, is that they are old friends, and you do learn some of their backstory, and then they come together in this new adventure. And I'd like to mention that the newest installment in the Amelian Legends will be out also later this year. It will be called Narwhals in the Stars. I'm going to put the cover right here for you guys to check out, and that will be a sequel to this. So I guess that's the one exception of the Amelian Legends, is that maybe you want to read this first. You wouldn't have to read this first though to read Narwhals in the Stars. It's also enough of its own story, but it is the one other book in the series where you actually do take characters from another of the stories and have that carry over. But if you're looking for a romance, this one focuses just on friendship. However, there may or may not be a romance developed between Jorah and Larmar in the sequel. You'll just have to read it to find out for yourself. But that one will involve a quest where they are looking for the Star Walls, which are these legendary magical narwhals that live in the stars and grant wishes, but they end up going on a much larger quest. They learn about this terrible curse that these people are under, and so going to see the Star Walls and ask for their help becomes even more important and more dire to see if this legend is even true. And then also in the story, you have a young girl and a young boy who are running away from this horrible, prejudiced, racist master, and their story ends up intertwining with Jorah and Larmar's. So again, keep your eye out for that. Maybe read the story first if you want to. This book is available in paperback, as I said, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Also, the ebook is free to download on those websites, as well as some other websites. So I always say that this is a really good story if you just want to sample my work for free and see if you even like my writing. And from there, you can kind of continue on and find other books of mine that you like to read. So next we have the Chronicles of the Mira, and this is the second book in the Amelian Legends. Again, they can be read in any order, but you know, you have to put them in some order when you publish them. So this is technically book 2. And the blurb to this one says, 3 girls help to restore peace between 2 noble cultures that never grow old, the Mira and the Scintillates, in this YA fantasy filled with adventure, sweet romance, and whimsical magic. In a forest of eternal autumn, 2 sisters with very different temperaments make a pact with a magic song that will change their lives forever. A girl with a wild spirit and a wonderful gift of song befriends a special horse that can fly without wings. But when its rarity places it in grave danger, the girl will stop at nothing to save her new friends. An intriguing romance develops between a mysterious healer with a notorious reputation for wooing unsuspecting girls and breaking their hearts, and the young lady who loves him enough to discover the dark curse he is trapped within. These 3 magical tales weave together to craft the Chronicles of the Mira, perfect for fans of Narnia, fairy tales, and Diana Wynne Jones. So again, this one has 3 stories that do connect in some ways about the Scintillate and Mira peoples. You have the story of Eternal Autumn and a girl who has to save her people from a horrible curse. You have a girl who discovers this magical horse and has to protect it. And then you have this romance between the mysterious magician and a young girl who falls in love with him. And he's notorious for breaking girls' hearts, but he's trapped within this horrible curse as well, and she'll have to figure that out and figure out how to save him. So that's the Chronicles of the Mira. It does have kind of a fairy tale-esque feel to it. It's comprised of 3 stories that do all connect in some ways, but are all their separate stories. But as you read more through the book, you'll see the ways in which they do connect together. And yeah, Diana Wynne Jones is one of my absolute favorite fantasy authors. I love that she's whimsical. I love that she's quirky. I love that she takes, you know, some common fantasy things like witches and kind of does her own thing with them, but also she makes up her own creatures and things as well. And so I'm definitely inspired by her in some of my writing. So next up in the Amelian Legends, we're going to talk about the crystal rings. So on the back of the book, it says 3 stories, 4 princesses, yet all are bound by the fate of 2 crystal rings. So this one doesn't include any more of a blurb than that, but that pretty much is a great summary of it. This one, like the Chronicles of the Mira, contains 3 stories that are separate and yet do connect. In this case, they connect via these 2 magical crystal rings that are seen throughout each story. And you've got 4 princesses going on 3 magical adventures. The first 2 stories I would say are fantasy romance. There are definitely heavy romance elements and romantic relationships that are being formed. However, there's also some deeper meanings having to do with prejudice and acceptance. And then the third story, while there are some romance elements in that one as well, it's a lot more of a quest adventure type of story between 2 sisters discovering each other and discovering their past together. So yeah, so that's the crystal rings. Moving on to Blood Maiden. Now Blood Maiden, this is a little bit older of a cover, so it doesn't have the Amelian Legends on there. The newer cover does. I'll also include a picture of that in the video for you guys to see. Although I will say that this one does at least have the nice new back cover with the moon on it. Very nicely done by my artist. And yeah, so this is one of my older books. I've written this one, well, this was technically my first book I ever had published. It was published by a small publisher back in the day. I've since republished it via self-publishing because that small publisher went out of business. And I decided to include it in the Amelian Legends. I guess I should have said this already, but one thing that does tie the Amelian Legends together is that all of the worlds in the Amelian Legends are created by this god called Amiel, hence the Amelian Legends. And so a lot of the characters will have this faith in Amiel just as a part of their natural life. They might talk about their faith, and they might talk about, you know, they might pray every now and then and things like that. Not in a preachy way, but just as a, hey, this is part of their daily life type of way. Yeah, so that kind of ties them all together. I probably should have said that as well, that in addition to them all being set in the same universe, there's also that common thread that ties them together as well. So let's just read about Blood Maiden, shall we? The blurb says, for Crystalline, the concept of humans and dragons living in harmony with one another is nothing more than a distant dream, especially when she is forced to participate in Tainan's annual ritual. Only one Quelda is chosen every year, which might sound like an honor. In reality, it's a fate worse than death. Along with her childhood sweetheart, Shalom, Crystalline must choose to embrace this cruel tradition or stand against it. However, taking a stand is no small task. Their only hope lies in rallying the 3 other dragon dynasties of Suleiman, but reaching them means fleeing Tainan, a feat that's not only punishable by death, but is so dangerous that no one who's ever tried it has lived to tell the tale. First, there's the infamous wall. Beyond that, the enchanted expanse of the ever-white lake. Can Crystalline and Shalom be the first to escape and stop Tainan's horrible ritual before it's too late? Or will the dragons, much like the people of Tainan, remain slaves to their tradition for all time? And so Blood Maiden is a little bit more of a serious tale. You've got these 4 dynasties in the world of Suleiman, and humans and dragons are meant to live in harmony with each other. Each dynasty has a human race, each dynasty has a dragon race, And the dragons are meant to protect the people, the human races, and in return, the humans give them an annual tribute. Maybe their crops. There's one dynasty where they're known for harvesting rocks and minerals and making those into weapons and armor, and so that's their tribute, their yearly tribute. But in the dynasty of Tainan, things have gone sour. They have developed this horrible tradition and now require a horrible tribute from their humans. And so this young girl, Chrysalin, and her childhood sweetheart, Shalom, have to decide, are they going to stay here and embrace this horrible, cruel tradition? Or are they going to try to escape from it? But escaping it would be no small feat. Again, it's surrounded by this massive wall, and then you've got the ever-white enchanted lake to cross. But their only hope would be to try to escape and implore the other dragon dynasties to help bring this horrible ritual to an end. Next up, we have Lily in the Snow. This is another compilation of 4 different stories. As you can see, this one's much thicker than the Crystal Rings even, or also definitely the Chronicles of the Mira. And so yeah, we're gonna go ahead and jump into the blurb for this one, which is actually a nice summary of what each of the stories is about. The blurb says, 4 tales of elemental beings weave together to craft this whimsical anthology of magic, adventure, and romance. The first story is called Lily in the Snow, just like the main title of the book. Micah Schist, a rock elemental, has lived all her life in the mountains with Pearson, her melancholy guardian. When Jewett, an earth elemental, visits their cave, Micah's world is turned upside down, as is her heart. She longs for a life outside the cave, and soon, an approaching enemy grants this wish. But even the gentle force of Jewett's world cause Micah to lose her fragile crystals, her life source. Can Micah be saved and live the life she's always dreamed? Story number 2 is called The Storyteller. Elisa's gift is that of storytelling. She has no problem embellishing the truth now and then. After all, she's never noticed the same consequences that befall the other imps who misuse their gifts. However, through an old friend who mysteriously reappears, she soon discovers that the consequences are much more severe than she could have ever imagined. Story number 3 is called Labyrinth Heart of Stone. Gargoyles, druids, haughty dragon fairies, a seductive Noelani, a mansion housing an endless maze of stairs, and, not to mention, a handsome brooding man made of stone. All these magical elements create the perfectly scandalous tale of Catherine, an earth elemental who sets out seeking freedom and discovers it in the most unexpected ways. And finally, story number 4 is called Spiral, a coming-of-age tale in which a rock elemental chooses to defy the unjust traditions of her people. Setting out on a journey to save herself and the one she loves, she ends up embarking on a personal journey of self-discovery. And so yeah, that pretty much sums it up pretty nicely. You've got 4 different stories about different types of elementals, rock elementals, forest elementals, and the stories and journeys that they each go on. You've got themes of self-discovery, you've got themes of, again, acceptance and love and friendship and forgiveness woven throughout these stories. As it is, I like to include themes in a lot of my books. Again, not to be preachy, but just in kind of a natural way to give them a little bit more depth. So now we have One Starry Night. This is definitely very heavily my romance fantasy book, as you can see from the cover. And this one is inspired by the first man that I ever really truly loved. And all of the emotions and everything that I experienced going through all of that are really poured into this book. But I didn't want it to be just a romance, because the man who inspired the story is a very deep thinking, wise and spiritual man himself. So I really wanted to have a deeper meaning. So toward the end, it takes on this kind of deeper spiritual journey, which is all I'll say because I don't want to give away any spoilers. But let's go ahead and read the blurb for this one to see what it's about. The blurb says, "My heart was not broken, so do not think to fix it. I did rescue you, and I will care for you, but I will never fall in love with you." Thus, Sir Chaos Jasper declares to Evren, the young damsel he rescues from the slave market on his journey south. Always south. Evren doesn't understand why he is so focused on the south, or what made the scars on his arms. or what created the bigger scars on his heart, the ones that keep him from opening his heart to anyone, including her. She doesn't even really understand why he saved her in the first place. All she understands is that she wants desperately to save him in return. Impossible, it seems. But Chaos is not the only one with secrets. There is more than meets the eye with Evren as well. More that has to do with the way she can see in the dark, make wishes on a sunset gemstone, and tell stories about a mysterious people who live in the stars. Sometimes, all it takes is just a little bit of faith and a wish upon a star to bring love and healing to life. So again, this one's definitely very heavy romance. I will say there is one intimate scene. It's a fade out scene, so again, nothing graphic, but you know, if you're a parent watching this and you're not sure if you are comfortable with getting it for your child or teenager, that's something good to know about this book from the romance element. It has a very fairy tale-esque feel to it. Some readers have commented that they feel like there is a little bit of an insta-love. The character does, Evren probably does fall for Chaos rather quickly. I will admit to that. I feel like for her character, it makes sense. And I feel like, again, with Evren kind of reflecting me being that young, naive, sheltered person, falling in love rather quickly, I feel like for some people, the insta-love thing does make sense. And of course you have to read the story to find out whether or not that's reciprocated. It seems like Chaos is being kind of difficult when it comes to the whole love department. But some people have compared this fairy tale to things like Tangled, which is a super high compliment to me. Tangled is definitely one of my absolute favorite Disney films, as well as princess films in general. So if you're into fairy tale romances, this might be the book for you. So real quick, I'm going to talk about the next book in the collection. It's called Tales from the Laszolian Realm. I'll put the picture here so you guys can see it. I don't actually have a copy with me because in my last book signing I sold out, which really is not a horrible problem to have. And it's an anthology as well, but unlike my other books like the Chronicles of the Mira and the Crystal Rings, where the stories are all interconnected, or even in the case of Lily in the Snow, where the stories aren't interconnected, but they're all about different elemental beings, and they have that kind of that common theme going on. Tales from the Laszolian Realm is different in that it is an anthology, but all the stories are completely separate. I wanted an anthology where I kind of took all of my other stories from this world that really had no other place, had no other home, and just create an anthology out of them. So you have one story about a girl who is blind, but in her dreams she can see. This mysterious gentleman comes to her in her dreams and helps her to see things she's never seen before. And so there's a little romance mystery going on with that story. You've got one story about a young girl who discovers that she's part of this mythical butterfly race of people. You've got a story about a young man who is a wizard and his family are wizards, and he has to choose whether he's going to continue to protect his parents by following this dark group of wizards, or whether he wants to protect the girl he loves, or can he save them both? He has to figure that out and go through this moral dilemma. And there's some other stories included in that anthology as well. And last but certainly not least, we have the Pirates of Melion. I love saying Melion, it's super fun to me. And the blurb to this one says, Elia Roque is fascinated by the charming stranger Captain Jack Rocket. And not because he has purple hair. After all, so does she, being a princess of the Melion archipelago. This new stranger is both more and less of a stranger than Elia realizes, for his name isn't really Jack Rocket. It's James Roque. He's not really a captain of one of her father's ships, but of the magical Suncatcher, the most notorious pirate ship in the waters of the Melion archipelago. He longs for the quiet, respectable life of a gentleman, as much as she longs for a life of freedom and adventure outside the palace walls. Together, can they recapture the moon vessel and rescue Elia's fiancé, Nikolai, while unraveling the dark secrets of their past? And can Elia show James that it's not through material wealth and stability that true peace is found, but through inner peace of the heart and soul? So this is a story also set in the Laszolian Realm. The Melion archipelago is in that realm. I'll see if I can show it to you. On the map down here at the bottom, the southernmost isles are the Melion archipelago. And it's my one pirate book. I got in the mood one day and I was like, you know what, I've never had a pirate book. We should totally have a pirate book. And so the Melions all have purple hair, or depending on the region, some have pink hair. And they're just a very seafaring, group of people, seafaring kingdom, seafaring race of people. They love sailing and fishing and all those good things, trading with other islands. But they're also very notorious for having pirates. And so you've got Elia Roque, the princess of the Melion archipelago, and you've got Jack Rocket, or at least that's who he's posing as, but really he is James Roque. And so you can kind of see already they have the same last name, so it's like, what's going on with that? How are they connected? You're going to learn all about that, and as it says, their dark past and their secrets as you go throughout the book. The book is divided in part 1 and part 2. In part 1, you have the characters meeting, and they have this fun little adventure that they go on. Part 2 gets a lot more serious, and that's when you really start to learn about James and Elia's history. So that sums up all of the books in the Amelian Legends to date. Again, Narwhals in the Stars, which continues with the characters from Larmar Gem in the Sea, will be out later this year, and that will add another book to that particular series, or I like to call it a collection, because again, the series does not have to be read in any particular order in order to be enjoyed or understood. Last but not least, we're going to talk about my trilogy, the Stragoni Sequence. And this is a lovely all-in-one compilation. However, the books are available, again, in both paperback and ebook form as 3 separate books. You've got Golden Healer Dark Enchantress, the first in the series, Memory Charmer, number 2, and Wish Granter and Other Enchanted Tales, which is number 3 and final in this trilogy. And this is the one series that I like to define as Christian fantasy, because even though in my other books, like I said, a lot of the characters have this faith in a creator god called Amiel, and that's just kind of naturally woven into some of their lives. In this book, the characters are specifically Christian, and again, it's not something that's meant to be preachy or anything like that, but they just are Christian, and that's just a natural part of their lives. So they will talk about God, or they will talk about their faith sometimes, or they will, pray sometimes if they're going through a difficult time or things like that. And so I do like to tell people that, because if that's something that maybe makes you really uncomfortable, this might not be the series for you. But in this series, there are different magical beings and creatures and peoples who are trapped within different spells. And so in each book, there's at least one spell that needs to be broken. And in this book, I really wanted to take common fantasy peoples like vampires, genies, there's banshees, and fairies and elves, and just create my own twist to them and make them my own thing. I was inspired to write the first book, Golden Healer Dark Enchantress, when I first read Twilight, which I know some of you will roll your eyes at, and I'm not at all offended by that. But I discovered Twilight when it wasn't super popular. Well, if it was super popular yet, I didn't know about it, being kind of more sheltered and all of that. And I just was fascinated with it, not so much because of the romance, even though I did enjoy that, but because I really liked the concept that there could be good vampires. So me being a Christian myself and wanting to do some Christian fantasy, I was like, I'm going to take that a step further and create Christian vampires and explore that and make that my own thing. So even though the first book in here does start out similar to Twilight, in that, you have a girl and she discovers this guy's a vampire, that's not the whole big twist or, the whole big dilemma of the book. That's discovered pretty early on, and then they end up going on a quest. They end up traveling to a completely different world that's kind of a more medieval type of world, and going on this quest, and there's even a battle at the end, and so it does end up being its own thing as you go further into the story. So, since I don't have the individual blurbs on the back of this book for each of these 3 books, I'll just tell you a little bit what they're each about. Again, Golden Healer Dark Enchantress, the first one is my vampire story. You have a girl who's an elf. It's set in modern times, again in North America, United States in this case, where the United States government and the Laszolian Council have made this peaceful pact, and part of that is that magical peoples should have their own schools, or even if they attend a regular school, their own buildings where they can go learn their magic, so that they're not harming any of the non-magic humans until they're able to master their skills. So she goes to a regular college that also has magical classes. She's a forest-footer elf, and forest-footers typically have a green thumb that they use to grow all kinds of plants. But in her case, she is born with a rare magical golden thumb that can be used for healing, and that comes into play because she comes to learn that her best friend Aaron is a vampire, in that he's part of this good group of vampires, but there's an evil group of vampires trying to take over the world that he's come from, and she has to figure out how to use her gift of healing to destroy the bad vampires, but without destroying the good ones. And so then book 2 continues with some of the characters that we meet in book 1. Again, this is book 2, Memory Charmer. And Memory Charmer is interesting because it's comprised of multiple stories, but that really interconnect and weave together into one overarching big story. You've got a mysterious man who feeds off of people's memories, he being the Memory Charmer. You've got another side story about these elemental beings, about this girl who is Cloud. So she's in charge of making sure the clouds are in order and are working properly. You've got earth, fire, wind, water. All of these elements are turned into human or, magical elemental human form, and they each have their own powers, and they're each meant to protect this world and keep it in order. But she's super lonely as Cloud, and so she decides to come to the below, to the surface, and to find, love and friendship and everything that she's longing for. But that ends up setting the world into kind of chaos, and so she has to figure out how to fix that. And, is she going to go back up to the sky and be lonely? Is she going to be able to stay here? How's she going to fix that? And all that is intertwined with the Memory Charmer's story as well. And then finally in Wish Granter, which might be my favorite installment in the collection, in the trilogy, is 3 different stories. And those are all separate stories, but again, pulling from characters that we've seen in book 1 and in book 2. There's some characters we meet in these first books that now have their own stories. So you have a boy named David that we meet in book 1, and he has a story where he has to figure out how to break the spell of his Banshee girl. And then you have the second story where Sarah, who we also meet in book 1 and see in book 2, she meets these people who are disfigured and scarred, and they look really ugly on the outside, but she has to learn about inner beauty, and she also has to help them because they are being under attack by these foes, and she happens to have a gift of being able to decipher who's telling the truth kind of just by looking at them, and she has to use that gift to find the enemies that are chasing these people. And then in the third story, and again, this really might be my favorite, that's my twist on genies. You have genies who live inside magical musical instruments, and in order to summon them, you have to play the right song the right number of times instead of rubbing a lamp. And you have a character, Grace, who you also meet in book 1, and she ends up having her own adventure having to do with the genies. She finds one of these musical instruments, she plays it, she unlocks the genie, for lack of better words, and becomes friends with him and starts to fall in love with him. But he's really not happy being a genie, and so she's trying to figure out how to free him, but at the same time there's this whole, other plot going on where people are disappearing from the castle, and so she and the genie are also trying to figure out where these people are disappearing to and how to save them as well. So yeah, that is pretty much all the books in the Stragoni Sequence. And so yeah, those are basically all of my books. As far as young adult fantasy is concerned, I will do another video later on where I tell you more about each of my children's books. Again, my children's books are heavily inspired by folks who have different disabilities, and you will see a couple characters like that in these books, but mostly there's a lot of racial diversity in my young adult fantasy, which is still very important to me.